Hey everybody, this is the first video in conjunction with Surf by Surfwest 4 in Seattle, and I have Wendell and Eric here from the Desolate Coast, one of my favorite Seattle bands. Welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
First thing I want to mention before we get into the festival is you put out in 2021, you put out your first record on CD, and then you put out 2 singles, and then now you have for sale on your Bandcamp page this massive album. Tell us about all the work that went into that.
All right. Well, Wendell, you want to start?
No, I mean the process kind of starts with you anyway. So why don't you can head it up?
All right. So after we did that first album, we were preparing for shows, and so we formed the full band. And so this one basically was kind of getting everyone up to speed at the very beginning, probably at the going into December of 21, right? For that first show. So we got a full band, and like during that time, wrote a lot of songs, demoed them, and then 2022 was, quite the busy year because I think we were talking, about this time last year, right? And so I had all the songs demoed, and it was just kind of a grind getting everything in. And so everything is basically recorded by Wendell and myself and Tony, the other guitarist, and then like when I say that, it's like we're kind of engineering it. And so Tony recorded like his parts, and then between Wendell and I, we recorded our parts, but then we would record with Dave on baritone guitar and with Mike on bass. And it was just kind of, that's how we got all the parts in. We used Pro Tools and just kind of like built it up. And then once we got stuff recorded, might go back and we go back and add extra layers of stuff, try some stuff out. I think we scrapped a couple of ideas within songs or changed stuff, but it was a lot of work in that sense of like, we build it up, and then, we did the mixing and all the production. And so it's like, oh, does this, extra thing that I've added in here, does this work? There's a lot of instruments on this album, even if they're in the background, that just like add texture and kind of like richness in the sound that aren't necessarily featured. And so it was, I don't know, a lot of layers, and then being like, is this good or is this like just over the top?
Yeah, that first album was all of the recording was just Eric and I. So with this one, there was a lot more collaboration with the full band. So Eric would track the demos, and then we would take it to the full band, play through them once kind of I had my part sussed out, and then things would start evolving from there. So everything that we had previously tracked would have to be retracked and retracked as the song evolved a little bit. I mean, the songs are definitely more rich and more interesting for it, but added an extra layer of complexity there.
Yeah,
it does sound like you've taken quite a leap forward. From 2021 to 2023, that period in there which you were writing and recording, it's, from my takeaways, it's unusual for a surf band to come away with 17 songs. That's prolific. How did you guys was that the collaboration that amounted to that many, or did you guys, like, once you got together to form a full band, you had this explosion of ideas?
The collaboration was definitely helpful, but Wendell, I don't know if you could probably talk to how quickly I can write songs.
Yeah, I mean, he's a machine. He's already got a third album, halfway cranked out and demoed. I think like he can't stop him.
Wow.
It's wild.
Yeah, it's I can sit down and turn them out. They're not always good, but if I write 30 songs and we can get 15 out of them, then that's great. And it's funny is like we talk about, like, yeah, I turn them out. Like one of the songs that I ended up really liking, I think you know, and so far people like it, is The Last Shadows of Summer. And that was a song that I was gonna throw away, honestly. Like I was like, this doesn't really go anywhere. It's kind of boring. And so I had set it aside, but I can, you know, I just churn them out and write these demos. And then I came back to it, it's like, oh, this is pretty. Well, you know, I think it'll work. And then I think like it actually like really came out really nice for the
Yeah.
record. And it almost was just lost in the hard drive somewhere.
Maybe you just needed a fresh ear on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because sometimes like I want people to tell me like in the group, I'm like, hey, is this good? Like, or is this like, do we need to move on? Because like I don't stir my feelings because it doesn't bother me to write another song. You know, like I don't want to like waste time working on something if it's not like that good. I don't want to like overwork it either to where it's like, okay, we don't need to force it. If it's not good, then let me know because I have no problem trashing it. The worst that happens is I just write another song, you know. And so in my head, sometimes I think I listen to them and I'm like, it's not that good, you know, or whatever. I've heard it enough times, you know, because I'll listen back to it and think about how, you know, what could be added or changed. And I'm like, is this actually good, or is it just catchy because I wrote it and then listened to it 1,000 times?
So you're back with Double Crown for this release.
Yeah.
And your first release was on Double Crown. Tell me about your relationship you have with Sean and the label.
Sean has been very supportive. Um, we were, I think, fortunate because when we first released that album, we weren't on like the first album. Like there was a run of CDs. I don't know how many do we like 60, Wendell? 100?
I think it was 100, but yeah.
And we just released them. Like we didn't. I don't even think we asked about labels just because it's like we have no money. We haven't played any shows. You know, I think we were fortunate that I was in the Verb. You know, that
Yeah.
got us in the door or in a lot of people's ears to begin with. But like it was just like we don't have any money. We're just like, who's gonna want us? We haven't even played a show, you know. And so we did it, and then he listened to it, and like just offered, like he's like, hey, can I work with you? And so I think we were very fortunate because I think a lot of labels wouldn't have. They're like, oh, well, you've already released it, you know, like
Yeah.
it's cool. We really like it. Maybe we can work together in the future. But he was like, no, like, you know, can we release this on actual like nice, like really nice quality CDs? You know, because we did like the, you know, cheaper option that we could afford, and
Yeah.
you know, and so he was like, I think he wanted to hear it, but I think he was already looking forward to this album. You know, I think he was ready to like work with us again, and you know, I know the Verb wasn't on Double Crown, but I know that he, you know, sold our CDs and records and stuff, and so we had like a little bit of a relationship from that. But you know, he's been very supportive, and all the, you know, stuff that he does online for us too, and getting CDs, you know, out to people.
Yeah. A lot of people might not know. Sean and Double Crown have kind of like a distro, where a lot of bands from different labels can sell on his site. So that's one of the cool places you can get from all over the world. But I want to talk about Seattle right now. Surf by Surfwest 4. How excited after the turnout from last year were you for this year?
Wendell?
I was super excited. Yeah, last year was crazy. It was, you know, it was hard to say how it was going to play out, being kind of the first one back from pandemic. And there was a great turnout, and I think it's only going to be better. I mean, we're really pumped on the slot that we have too. I think, you know, it's going to be a heck of a day. I mean, a heck of a 2 days, I guess, day and a half, whatever. But yeah, very excited to have the opportunity to play that again.
I'm gonna have an opportunity to talk to Tien and Tom next week, but I've been speaking with Mel, and he's really pushing hard for this year. I have tons of bands from that that festival coming on to talk about it. Which I was like, from last year, I was like, the scene seems like it's bigger. Is it bigger now?
I think so. Like, I think it's gonna sound bad, but I think it's crazy because there's so many bands, and sometimes I'm like, how are there this many surf bands? You know, because like sometimes some of them are coming up from farther north, you know, or they're starting out, and it's like that's a great show to start out with because you have like an audience that actually is geared up to listen to surf, you know, that's showing up. And you know, I can't help to think back to like the 2000s when the Verb was playing a lot. It was like us and like two other bands, you know, and that was the
Yeah.
scene. And like here, you know, we have some bands coming from out of town, but only a few. Like it's really, you know, a local scene, and that's not even thinking about like who might be coming out of Portland too in the scene, you know, because that stretches up here a bit. But there are so many, and like we have our release show this coming Saturday on the 20th, and there is like surf shows this week that we're, you know, we're not playing, but like other bands like the Evans Tones and are playing like this week, you know, and like that never used to happen. And so it's great to see. I mean, I don't know if you've Phil from uh like a million bands. He's always been part of the scene, even if like he's played a lot of kind of roots rock and roll and everything. And I swear he's got a show every night in some band, and he'll be playing with us on a Saturday, but in his punk rock Elvis tribute band. And so
Awesome.
it'll be an awesome show. But yeah, the scene is huge compared to what it's been in the past. Yeah.
Do you think that that was because what I noticed is during COVID, a lot of bands were springing up virtually and collaborating virtually, and a lot of those bands happen to be surf bands. Do you think that was the catalyst for that?
Yeah, I'd say probably absolutely. I mean, it afforded a lot of people time to maybe focus on projects that they wouldn't normally have focused on. Whether it's like they had ideas for instrumental surf or instrumental guitar music, but that wasn't their primary band. It opened up a whole other, you know, opportunity for them to have time to work on that, you know, for better or for worse. But yeah, I think that there was a lot of new and interesting projects that came out of, you know, people not having the availability to go do all of the other things that they were normally doing.
Yeah.
I also think like on the other side of that is that more people were looking for music to listen to, which kind of gave like that feedback to it as well. And so like even if you were, you know, you're fortunate you were working that whole time, you were likely like working from home. And so like when I'm talking about like that time, even just not driving to and from work, you know, or being at home on your lunch break gives you that time. But I think a lot, you know, there's that. You think like podcasts, YouTube channels, all those things like had way more right success because they were looking, you know, for like content at home that they could take in too. And so like uh, you know, the pandemic is more than just 2020, but you could argue that Will and I started recording when, you know, before I had to go back in, you know, in person to work.
Yeah.
And like we were able to get a lot done, just the two of us, because, you know, we are always home.
One of the things I admire that when I was playing music in the 80s and 90s is that a lot of musicians these days record themselves. Like we didn't have the option to do that. There was no tools or anything like that. Um and and even if there was like a studio that we could use, we didn't have the knowledge to use it. How did you use that time to benefit and grow in a technical sense?
Well, there's a lot of, you know, that first record, I'm not going to, but part of me wants to go back and remix it, you know, because like I learned a lot in that process. And then it's a lot of articles, a lot of YouTube, a lot of trying stuff out, you know, and especially with like EQ and FX and, you know, um, some trial and error. You're doing stuff that you think sounds good, and then you listen back after you've done like a ton of work and you're like, oh, this sounds like a mess, you know, or you think, oh, that sounds pretty good. And then you go do some other songs and you're like, oh crap, well, these sound way clearer. It's a lot of it just going back and like fixing things you thought you were doing right the first time. But you know, there's definitely a lot of watching YouTube, you know, like production and mixing, you know, tutorials, and like especially when it came to how to use reverb effectively, like you know, for like the tracks, not like on the
Yeah.
guitar, or different delays and like compression, but a lot of it just like EQ, because I think the tendency, like when you're thinking, is like, oh, whatever, it sounds good on its own, but on this one, especially with the album that came out today, there's a lot of tracks on it, and so it's a lot of like high pass, you know, filters and stuff, because otherwise it's just gonna sound like mush. And so realizing that, well, this track doesn't sounds not very good at all on its own, but it like you need to cut all that low stuff out, or even just from the mids down, because all you want is that little bit of sparkle in the like in the track to mix in. And so it's, I feel like this one is a lot, you know, more balanced. It's a clear while also being maybe more lush, I don't know, than the first album, but a lot of studying for sure.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I think that the EQing to get stuff out of the way, I mean, especially with you've got, you know, at bare minimum, two guitars, a baritone and a bass. That's a pretty low range to try to move people out of the way so that everybody can stand out. But Eric did a great job at that. We managed to throw a little bit of more money kind of at some of those problems too. For drum recording, that first one, that was all in a concrete room in my basement with two microphones. So it came out, you know, a little bit more raw. I invested in a little bit more mics so we can kind of isolate things and move stuff around a little bit better, so the drums can be a little bit more balanced, or like get fine tuned a little bit more. And use some of those, I think, for some of the instrument recording as well.
Awesome.
It's interesting, like him mentioning that, like thinking about that first record, it sounds old in some senses because of how the drums are mic'd. You know, it sounds almost like a 50s, 60s recording as far as like, and it fits the vibe just fine. And then, but the drums, in my opinion, sound way better on this record, like just because they're like they're punchy, like you can hear them, you know. And also, you know, in each, we couldn't mix the drums. Like I had to mix the drums basically with EQ on that first record, you know, and cymbals are real strong, you know, and you're trying to cut those down and like bring everything else up sometimes. And then Wendell had to like play accordingly for recording, right? Like you had to like hit the cymbals lightly, hit the snare and the bass drum, probably the kick pretty hard, you know, just to try and like balance it out. And so I would imagine, when were you able to like play more freely on this one as far as like how you played, because you could,
Oh
you know,
yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. I could just kind of play naturally because we could dial it in later on.
mhm,
Awesome.
huge, way more present, way more, I feel like more energy coming out of the drums because of that.
Awesome. Well, is there anything you guys would like to talk about before we sign off?
Wendell.
No, I just want to say thanks for having us. Yeah, it's been a hell of a time. I'm looking forward to how this album release plays out. We've got a bunch of shows coming up. We'll try to publicize that as much as we do, maybe better than we have historically.
Yeah, definitely excited for this album. I will release all the tracks now so everyone can listen to them. Thank you for the heads up on that. We're excited for the show on May 20th at the Cottontail, the release show. We're excited for Surf by Surfwest in July. The Friday night has, you know, a great band, and it has the Irradiates from France. I know they're playing, and the Del Destroyers are playing that night. And then we're on Saturday all day. We'll be on the inside at night, you know, loud and rocking for you, probably pretty late because it'll be all day, but it's a great lineup and the bands are getting better. It's not just that there are more bands, but like the bands themselves are improving each year, and it's nice because the community is really nice. It's not a competitive community. It's a very supportive community. And so it'll be, even if just the bands were there, it would be a wonderful show.
Awesome. I want to let everybody know that the Desolate Coast will be playing Surf by Surfwest 4 in this July. There's a link in the description to where you can buy their new album. It's available to purchase on CD, streaming, but I highly suggest buying a physical copy. And pretty soon you'll see a review here on our channel. Thank you so much, Wendell and Eric. It's a pleasure to have you on. I'm a huge fan of your music.
Right on. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you so much for having us.